Welcome to another episode of Grow Beyond Grades, streaming live on YouTube, LinkedIn, and in the Grow Beyond Grades Facebook group. The goal of Grow Beyond Grades is to provide opportunities for educators to connect, share ideas, and support each other on the journey toward more effective and humane assessment practices, particularly those that provide viable alternatives to the culture of grading and testing in schools. If you're joining us live, we encourage you to engage in the conversation by sharing your questions and comments. Let's get started as we explore more ways to grow beyond grades.
This episode of Grow Beyond Grades is brought to you by Got Feedback. Imagine a classroom where feedback is personalized, conversational, and focused on growth over time, where every student's journey is co-created with care and learning becomes a dynamic, interactive experience. Got Feedback is completely free for the individual teacher, and the difference it can make is priceless. Try today at gotfeedback.com. All right. Welcome to another episode of Grow Beyond Grades Live.
Hi.
All right. How's it going, Michelle?
Good. It's December. I just told my son this morning in 31 days, it's going to be 2025.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So
Years flying by. So, all right. Well, I'm Dave Franjosa, one of your hosts for GBG Live.
And I'm Michelle Cottrell-Williams.
All right, so we want to give a big thank you to everybody who supports Grow Beyond Grades and allows us to do live stream. This is our Patreon users, and a big shout out to Got Feedback. They are one of our bigger sponsors, so we appreciate everything. If you can support us, it lets us bring high quality free resources to teachers everywhere, and we're just looking to expand that, so we appreciate everything. Thank you. So tonight we have a really special guest. I am very excited for this conversation. I'm a little out of my depth here because I'm a science teacher, and so we are in the ELA realm, so but I really think what she's doing is important, and I think a lot of people need to hear it. So
we're all in the student realm, Dave.
Yes, we are. So, all right. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Angela Stockman onto the broadcast. Angela, how you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me tonight. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you.
So could you tell us a little bit about yourself? So who
Sure.
are you? What do you do?
Background.
Yeah, a little bit of background.
I was a teacher for a really long time, mostly at the middle level, although I have some experience at the elementary and the high school level. I was in the classroom for about 15 years, and when I was there, I had the opportunity to work with an amazing professional learning facilitator by the name of Katie Huber, who is a great local leader that a lot of people have a lot of respect for in the Western New York area. I always said that if Katie left her position, I was going to apply for it. And she did, and I did, and I got her job and replaced her. For a little while, I was a regional staff developer, and I supported literacy work in 26 of our component school districts through our local BOCES here in New York State. That was a lot. And I intended to go back to school and get my PhD. And then the economy tanked the year that I did that. We had a huge stock market crash. At the same time that I was asked if I would be willing to do independent instructional coaching in some local school districts. And I did that. And the results of that work were really rewarding. And I enjoyed working with teachers in that more sustained and job embedded capacity. And so rather quickly, I really had the privilege of becoming a full-time professional learning facilitator, and I started my own business. I've been an independent consultant ever since. I also teach at the undergrad and graduate level at Daemen University here in Amherst, New York, and I founded a writing studio in Buffalo because I was really struggling to move the writers that I was trying to support and serve well forward. So in 2008, I founded the Western New York Young Writers Studio, which is a learning community comprised of teachers and students. We meet in the summer for a short period of time, about 2 weeks. And then when I'm able to run at full capacity, which has been a struggle since COVID, we meet every month as well. What was really powerful about the boom years of my studio, and it was over 10 years, is that I was able to kind of lean into really frustrating problems that we were encountering in the schools that I supported. So teachers that I worked with in school districts came to studio, which existed outside of the school system. And some of their students were there as well, K-12. And we just got to study what writing was and how to do it really well. At the same time that I was trying to solve problems beside really invested teachers inside of K-12 school districts within and well beyond New York State, and assessment played a huge role in all of that. So today I still support teachers. I do a lot of professional learning facilitation. Most of it is job embedded. A lot of it has to do with going gradeless, moving toward either competency or standards based grading and reporting approaches. And my most recent book is The Writing Teacher's Guide to Pedagogical Documentation. I'm a huge supporter of using multimodal expression and multimedia to document learning and to ground my understanding of students' needs and how to serve them better in that warmer and more qualitative data.
Thank you. So right at the end there, I heard you mention multimodal expression. Can you talk a little bit more about what multimodal expression is and what
Sure.
role it plays in assessment?
Yeah. So when we step into school, we enter sometimes in an environment that can feel really high pressure and artificial because we privilege print. Inside of our schools, we tend to create learning contexts where the written word matters more than anything else. And it can actually create a screen that really convolutes our assessment results and the findings that we're kind of reaching hard and fast conclusions around. Multimodal expression is an invitation for learners to use more than written letters and words to demonstrate their knowledge of something or to simply express themselves. Once we leave the world of school, and even in the context of school, so much of who we are and what we want to say and expressing our thoughts and our feelings, demonstrating our knowledge and being able to perform skills well requires us to move well beyond print. So multimodal expression has to do with representing our ideas and expressing ourselves using more than written words, by using visuals, by laying things out like these magazines and books behind me, lots of spatial expression going on there. When you think of comics and you think of graphic novels and the use of panels, that is a mode of expression. Designing so that what we're about to express can be heard, and knowing that and being intentional about the way that we express ourselves through sound or the absence of it, or even ambient noise. Multimodal expression, oftentimes people really understand when I speak about Helen Keller and the fact that her teacher Annie had to use sign language in the palm of her hand in order to communicate with her. Multimodal expression is about using every mode of expression with clear intention and combining modes for effect so that our message is best communicated. And the fact is that oftentimes print is not the best mode of expression. We know that as consumers of information. That's why we love to go on TikTok and we love to go on Instagram, and Pinterest is so popular and Canva is exploding, because we understand intuitively and appreciate multimodal expression. But when it comes to assessment, we often rely on print alone. And the fact is that knowing how to use print really well is a really complex skill set in and of itself. And so if we're demanding the use of written words to assess content, concepts, skills, knowledge that has nothing to do with writing, like social studies or science, for instance, it can really create a screen and convolute our assessment results.
Thank you.
So, as a science teacher, I completely agree with you. This is something that I do every day, and my content lends itself very well to that. So, what about the ELA teacher who says, well, my job is to get students to
Yeah.
write? So, how do you address that?
There's two different ways to think about multimodality in my world. I mean, there are a lot of different ways, but the two conversations I often find myself having with teachers are these. Where might we invite multimodal composition into our writing classrooms and workshops so that the final product is a multimodal composition and students are learning how to use um, different modes of expression to create something, for instance, like a stop motion video or an explainer video, a video essay, being able to use compositional skills that are more 3D in nature. I do 3D prototyping all the time with students where they are given loose parts like Legos or Play-Doh. Or even natural elements like stones or shells or leaves or sticks. And if I can give them the structure of a story, a really common one that most English teachers are familiar with is a story is somebody wanted, but so then. An argument is making a claim, supporting it with evidence, anticipating a counterclaim, refuting it, and calling people to action. If we know what the structure is, we can give students materials to rapidly prototype that structure. And then I can look over their shoulders and very rapidly check in with them, and they can talk with me about their intentions for each of those different pieces of the structure. That actually lowers the load on their verbal working memory. And that is a really important part of being able to produce high quality print. When we rush kids to screens, keyboards, devices, pencils, paper way too fast without giving them the opportunity to represent their ideas first and talk about them, hear what it is they want to produce written words around. When we rush them to pencil and paper or keyboard too fast, they will lower the complexity of their ideas to match their print power. So one of the ways that we can invite multimodality into the classroom, into English classrooms specifically, is to invite the use of things like video essays or stop motion videos or infographics, and they're designing those sorts of things. And then teachers will say, well, where does the print live? Because I still am responsible for teaching them how to compose. It usually lives in the planning tools, or it can live in an artist statement. Artist statements are deeply analytical sorts of reflective pieces that are essays. And so if a student has created a gorgeous stop motion video and they can do some sort of design analysis that they're folding into an artist statement, you're getting kind of the best of both worlds there. And you're also getting the opportunity to collect multiple measures of assessment data, both qualitative and more quantitative against a rubric, perhaps, if that's really important to you. That multimodal composition is a finished product that is for an audience. I will tell you this, though. When it comes to producing high quality print, that other type of multimodal composition where students are using loose parts to represent their ideas within a structure. The story is somebody wanted, but so then, I can use loose parts to rapidly build that, and I can talk it through with you. And in doing so, what we find is that students will often use higher level vocabulary words. They'll stretch into even more complex ideas. They'll start rambling and dreaming up new opportunities and ideas and possibilities for the thing that they want to write, whether it's narrative or argument writing, more analysis sorts of work. I tend to find that it's really important in every class period, if I know what my learning intentions are, or learning targets, if that's the language that you use, I can have my students represent that multimodally first in about 5 to 7 minutes, have the opportunity to talk it through, lowers that load on verbal working memory, gives them the opportunity to just have conversation, low pressure conversation. And now we have such incredible tools, multimedia tools that'll allow them to record that. They can listen back, and then they can start to produce print that's usually of higher quality because they've protected all of that complexity. And we're writing just one small bit at a time. It makes a huge difference in my experience. A lot of the work that I do in schools is actually about improving performance on standardized tests. I don't like them any more than anyone else. And in fact, I'm facilitating a good chunk of the professional learning for the New York State Plan Pilot right now. That is an initiative that's running parallel to our Blue Ribbon Commission that is decoupling our Regents exams from graduation requirements. And so I'm in the process of coming to know and work with our 17 component school districts that are in the process of thinking about how might we offer an alternate pathway to graduation for students. And we know that we don't want to lose the ground that we've gained over the last long while we've been pursuing our New York State standards. And it becomes really important to get clear about, if we're going to give kids this really rich, authentic experience, which is either a performance-based learning experience or full-blown project-based learning, or even a capstone project, where are the assessment moments in there? And how might I use multimedia tools to scoop the data out of that experience by taking pictures, audio, video recording, looking at process work and documenting that, by taking photographs. And more importantly, when we capture that multimodal perspective, what does it help us understand about learners that print doesn't? And that's a really important piece about multimodality that we don't talk about enough, is that each of the modes of expression affords us something that the other modes don't. And so when I think about multiple measures, and I think about the relationship between what happens in school and that school to prison pipeline, and the role that perseverating and on print and privileging print has played inside of that whole dynamic, I think it's so important that we're creating truly inclusive spaces that are considerate, culturally considerate, giving students the opportunity to not only demonstrate what they know multimodally, but to leverage multimodality in service to higher quality print and the use of higher level vocabulary words and the development of stuff that's really complex, even if it is produced with written words.
So you said a couple of things that really kind of resonated with me, and you're really using the multimodal assessment or expression to create on-ramps for every student.
Yeah.
Right? Because students don't engage if they don't see themselves in the success criteria, whatever you want to call it, if it's learning progressions or rubrics. If they don't see themselves in that success criteria, they are not engaging. It doesn't matter what you say. So, I think, what you're doing right there is proactively creating safe spaces for students to take risks.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's so exciting about it is when we do invite that multimodal representation, it can't be about pretty. So it's not about giving them a gorgeous, sketchbook and having them create artwork. I mean, that's lovely. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that, where they're drawing something that's absolutely gorgeous. But I am saying that for students who are maybe hesitant to produce written words, maybe they're also going to be hesitant to draw something gorgeous. It's not about pretty, it's about representation, where they might just have this Lego build that doesn't really mean anything to me until they start talking. What it is that these materials and representative nature of loose parts, it's really, it's a container for their ideas that represents them and gives them the ability to start talking. And when they start talking, that talk is absolutely essential to their ability to transition to the production of written words. And we find this even with kids who self-define, or maybe their teachers define them as more gifted writers. Those materials are easy to tinker with. They're easy to play with. And so you have a lot of really rapid prototyping and revision of ideas happening there. And the materials really force them to think in metaphor and simile as well. And that's where a lot of the complexity comes. Because when you build something out of Legos, or you build it out of buttons and stones and feathers, and I say to you, what did you make and what does that represent and why did you choose those materials? My friend Dan Ryder always says, getting them to explain their intentions when they're using materials, it's huge. Oftentimes they speak in simile and metaphor and symbol when they do that. And if I can just hand them a sticky note and say, jot that down, that's a brilliant detail. Add that to a sticky note, that will eventually make it into the paragraph or the passage. And it just elevates it. It's hugely important.
Yeah, when you were talking just now, I started thinking about many teachers, many people's kind of fears and trepidations around AI. And like student cheating and using AI to write for us, right? And as I'm listening to you talk, it makes me think about how that is one way for teachers to support student learning and communication and critical thinking, that kind of gets around the AI issue, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I facilitate AI workshops through the Bureau of Education and Research for English teachers in grades 6 through 12. And this conversation is put in front of me in every single full day session. And really, when I'm asked about mitigating the risk of cheating, I really talk about, are you inviting students to document their learning through the process? If they're documenting their process work, that means you've created a process. You haven't just assigned it, right? And that's one of the biggest reasons why kids are turning to AI, is we need to be teaching writing and composition and not just assigning it. That's the first step. The second is, if you invite them to document their learning each day, how did your thinking change? How did your learning change today? How did your work change? How are your feelings changing? And they're taking pictures or audio or video recording, and you're doing that day by day. If they turn in something in the end that really is dramatically different from, what you've been seeing of their reflective work through the process, it opens a really respectful conversation around, this doesn't really seem to align with what I've been seeing out of you through this whole process, which I've enjoyed. Can you speak to that a little bit for me? Documentation of learning puts the focus on the process. It's richly multimodal instead of the product. It also gives us an opportunity to be in such more closer relationship with our students too. And that makes a really big difference. Also using loose parts and materials, more 3D kind of prototyping, it really does mitigate the risk of them turning to AI to do fast and sort of cheap work.
Yeah. So I'm considering which direction to go from here. Dave, did you want to hop in with a question? Okay.
So where can teachers go to find resources that would help them? Because this sounds great, but a lot of teachers won't initiate if they don't have a roadmap or a blueprint. So where can they go to get some of these supports so that they can do this?
One of the things that I offer, and it's free, is something called the Make Writing Starter Set. And if people follow me on Blue Sky, or they're following me on Instagram, and I'm Angela Make Writing on Instagram, I'm Angela Stockman, I think, on Blue Sky. But if you are able to reach out to me, the Make Writing Starter Set is like an over a 50-page document that literally gives you the how-to for how to make the process of writing more multimodal and use those loose parts and that rapid prototyping approach that I'm talking about It's right in there and it's free. And I'm also really accessible online and happy to kind of talk shop a little bit more. When you start moving in that way, and it's very simple, and you can take it one small little step at a time, you start to realize when you try exactly what you're able to see in your students that maybe was hidden when you were relying on and privileging written words alone a bit too much. And that usually then leads to big conversations around how can I begin shifting the way that I'm grading and assessing in my classroom in order to honor what multimodality is demonstrating about my students. And that's a conversation that I would love to have more too. I have actually a meetup with teachers once a month. We have a small group that gathers on Zoom on the third Tuesday of every month. It's free. And we get together and we talk about how we're trying to do this. And I share all of the resources that I can openly. If you find me on Instagram or on Blue Sky, you'll see in my profiles a link to my link tree. And if you subscribe to my newsletter, you have access to my entire Drive file on top of that. So I give a lot of stuff away, and I would highly recommend just reaching out because I'm happy to help, through the screen in that particular way. And we have a once a month meetup where people can join me too.
Awesome. So I know that what matters a lot to you and to a lot of educators is creating safe spaces for students. And so I would love to just kind of open the floor to you to kind of summarize, wrap up, and share your thinking around multimodal expression and literacy development and how these approaches contribute to creating safer spaces in education for more students.
So I'm a Reggio-inspired educator, and those who are familiar with the Reggio approach, I've been on several study tours there now. You're aware of the fact that those schools kind of grew out of an anti-fascist movement by mothers in Reggio Emilia, Italy after the war. And one of the things that they value very much there are aesthetic literacies and the use of loose parts and multimodal expression. They also value documentation very much because this is about ensuring that we are teaching and, more importantly, coming to understand a whole human being. When we reduce expression to written words, we're really diminishing what it is people are trying to express. There's so much that's hidden there. Socrates himself was really very concerned about the proliferation of print. He thought that once we separated what was written from the person who wrote it, and writing is able to travel, that it would invite corruption and the loss of intimacy between human beings in such a way that we would come to really terribly misunderstand one another, and it would do a lot of harm. And I think we're living through that right now. And that doesn't mean that writing is a terrible thing, but it's really important to understand that cultural archetypes really matter here. Our schools were built by individualists for individualists. And that means that kids who are descended from those cultures tend to do really well in our public schools here in the West. And what's really sad and really shameful about that is that we know that that's wrong, and we know that we have so much that we need to do differently and better, and yet we're still hesitant to try and to go in that direction. And I think so much of that has to do with the curse of expertise. We get into situations as teachers and as leaders where we're expected to know it all. And if we don't, we're afraid someone's going to shame us for that. So we don't try and we don't take risks. And then we end up perpetuating this cycle where the voices that are expressed the loudest inside of schools, that are most accepted, and the kids who are most privileged in our schools are kids who are descended from more individualistic cultures, and kids who might come from more communal spaces School was not necessarily designed with them in mind. And what is really interesting about all of this is that even the production of print, in order to get there, we really need to be relying on different modes of expression as well. And so when I think about, and I know that there's a lot of pushback around the concept of safe spaces, and you'll have all sorts of, you know, nefarious forces, right, inside of the world really criticize that language, right, as well. When I think about that, it is simply about ensuring that we are professional enough and that we are scholarly enough and committed to our own learning as professionals enough to understand when we are leaving half of our students or more out of a conversation, to understand and to be able to question and challenge research, and to be aware of how things have evolved, you know, over time. In order to create safe spaces, we have to create spaces where we're not threatened by students who don't show up the way that we wanted them to. And we are often threatened by that. When a student doesn't show up the way that we hoped they would, or, you know, we worked really hard at this unit or lesson and designing it, and now they're not showing up the way that we intended, it's really difficult not to take that personally. And it's really difficult not to feel threatened by that. But it's such a great learning moment and opportunity. And often we're probably finding ourselves in a relationship with a kid who just does it differently than we would have. And so our willingness to be humble in our practice, it also creates safety for us. And I'm always really intrigued by those critics of safe spaces, because they're some of the most miserable, critical people I know, which means they're pretty threatened. And so all of this also has to do with regulating ourselves, developing humility ourselves, quitting our own shaming of ourselves, right? If we can really just accept the fact that a kid didn't show up the way that we wanted them to because they do it different, and wow, we could learn something from that kid. And we don't have to know it all. That's not really what good teachers do. They don't know it all. They're just committed to chasing really great questions and really riddling with that sort of stone in their shoe or knot in the process, hanging in and learning. That's what good teachers do. And so when I think about safe spaces, I don't just think about kids. I think about the adults who need them too. And oftentimes it's the biggest critics of safe spaces that could use one, is my perspective.
Well, Angela, we respect your time, and this has been a fantastic conversation. So, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I'm just so excited that Blue Sky is taking off the way that it does. And a long time ago at the end of podcasts, I stopped inviting people to follow me in that other space because I just wasn't showing up there. But now I can confidently say, I hope that if people see this podcast, they'll come find me there, or on LinkedIn as well. I'm hanging out there and on Instagram, and I'm happy to share all of the free resources that you might want to get started with this, and to kind of hang in with you over the distance as you try to.
Well, we really appreciate everything. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It was great.
For everybody else, we will be back first Sunday of every month. January, we have Mike Rutherford, who's going to join us, and we'll be talking about God feedback a little more in depth. So come find us 8 p.m. Eastern time, first Sunday of every month.
Woo, woo.
All right. Have a good
Have
night.
a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Grow Beyond Grades. You can find more great content on our website, growbeyondgrades.org, on Twitter at GBGEDU, or on Facebook at Grow Beyond Grades. If you enjoy this content, please consider supporting our efforts by becoming a member. Go to patreon.com/gradeless and choose your level of support. We hope you'll join us for the next installment of Grow Beyond Grades.